Last time on Read My Mind Radio. Now that we heard from someone quite familiar with captions, do you think that's the bar we as advocates for audio description should be striving to reach? Think about that while I bring on our next guest.
My name is Eric Wickstrom. I am the Director of Audio Description for International Digital Center. Pronouns are he, him.
Hi, my name is Reese Lloyd. I'm the studio head for Descriptive Video Works. My pronouns are he, him.
When anyone asks me for examples of quality audio description tracks for networks and streaming platforms, IDC and DVW are the two I tell people to check out. Are there others? Yes. But they don't check off the same boxes that these two do. Let's keep it real. IDC helped kick off the inclusion and hiring of blind narrators. They're not the first, but to my knowledge, they've done the most. And if I'm wrong, please, seriously, educate me. I'm at readmymindradio@gmail.com. DVW also is doing the same, and they employ Blind QC. Welcome back to Read My Mind Radio. We're in the final episode of the Flipping the Script on Audio Description season, or part 2 of No One Will Save Us. We're taking a look at the current state of audio description in order to determine how we can best advocate for improved quality and wider adoption. If you haven't listened to part 1, pause here and take a listen. We'll wait. Okay, you're back. Let's get it. Read my mind. Read my mind. Radio. When I invited Eric and Reese to join me on the podcast, I asked them each to bring 3 to 5 issues that most threaten the future of AD and some thoughts as to what we can do about them.
I mean, there's a few things that stand out. Obviously, TTS, synthetic speech. It's a problem that impacts our voiceover folks, but it also affects every area downstream for audio description. A lot of companies that have no business being in the space are in the space, and they're in it in major ways. I don't have access to enough quality writers day in and day out. Sometimes I feel like, really, truly great writers. So if I don't have access to it, these companies definitely don't. But somehow they're managing to crank out absurd amounts of audio description with people that have no business writing it or being involved in it. The quantity is more than it's ever been. And I'd argue because of that, the quality is lesser than it's ever been, which is a sad reflection on it.
While there's definitely a relationship between TTS and the influx of companies less concerned with quality, we'll consider these as 2 separate issues.
And then we have ongoing problems, in my opinion, with the lack of folks of color being involved in the writing process and in the voiceover process. I think the 4th thing that's problematic right now still is the lack of involvement from members of the blind community in the process of creating audio description, whether it be voiceover, writing, QC, what have you. I don't think many companies are doing a good enough job still in involving folks in the community.
Cool. Reese?
Ditto. The only thing that sits outside of that I would add to it is that we still haven't solved this devilish problem of accessibility content traveling with the content and moving from service to service. I feel like this is my sort of like Da Vinci Code. I'm trying to solve this unsolvable mystery, and I think the answer is that it's really, really straightforward. And because it's so straightforward, it remained unsolved. Maybe one other thing I would throw in is that I don't think there's enough people in prominent positions in audio description that are thinking about what it could be, who are pushing the industry forward. There's Eric, and I think there's the folks at DVW that I work with, but I don't sense pressure coming from behind to make me go, oh, I need to be even more on it, because there's other people who are like really pushing the envelope out there, both whether it's creatively or whether it's like looking at the broad reach. We're really at a really early stage of audio description. If you think about how visual our world is and how inaccessible that is, including all the video content that exists on the internet that is untouched.
Let's start with the problem of the pass-through, or the idea that audio description should travel with the content. This would eliminate the problem of turning on one channel to watch a film that you know had AD in the theater or on a different streaming network, but it's not available on the current platform.
This is my opinion, at least. Reese, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. Unlike captioning, which is mandated federally to be on everything has to have captioning. We're still picking and choosing based on, I don't know what criteria is, what has to have audio description and what doesn't. So it's only when that content comes into the worlds of the big top cable networks, the top streaming services, places where they're being legally mandated, where they have to commission those files. So those files then live at that individual streaming service or that individual network instead of living with the content from inception like it should, like the captioning does. Captioning has to live with the asset before it goes anywhere. So if we can get audio description being mandated on every asset level, like captioning, that would solve that problem entirely. The other way to solve that is networks communicating.
Doesn't that seem like a simple solution? Communication?
I think the simplest answer is it's too much still left to the individual networks to deal with instead of having it being inherent to the assets at inception every time.
I would totally agree with you on that. I sort of see the solution to pass through being that instead of it being a pull, it has to be a push. Instead of the downstream content rights holder remembering to ask for it, it should be pushed with all the other assets. It should just be automatic.
Right.
If those who have the asset and are licensing it to someone else were just to go, hey, here's the AD track too. I don't know what happens in those negotiations, but I can't imagine the cost of that being exponential given the investments. I do think that a push model works better than a pull model in this case.
With all of the technology available to us today, communication shouldn't be an issue. And it's such a quicker fix compared to enacting legislation.
I'll take a slightly more optimistic view. I don't think it necessarily requires the legislation to be enacted. I think people like to get ahead of legislation because they don't want to be slammed by the requirement and have no idea what they're going to do. And because I think this is a relatively simple problem to solve, I think any hint that this is going to be included in future legislation would probably unbreak that dam. I've had this dream of getting everybody in a room and going, can we all have a grown-up conversation? There are impediments, but none of them are insurmountable and just require somebody at each of these organizations to focus on it. However we end up making that happen as an industry remains to be seen.
The other issue, again, is quantity is important, but until we need to focus on quality, because, if we mandate that every network has to have audio description, I can promise you, Reese and I are not going to get much busier, but there's going to be a bunch of companies that are going to be slammed with work and doing a very poor job. It's important that everything is accessible, but it needs to be properly accessible. It has to be a quality product. Otherwise, why are we doing it in the first place? Take some pride in it.
Next up, let's talk about getting more blind people involved in every aspect of the AD production process.
I'd go a step further. It's not just about the production aspects of it. I think that there's all too many people involved in the creation of audio description, whether that be our clients or the companies that produce audio description, who've never met a blind person, who've never had a conversation with a blind person about audio description. So it's also, I think, incumbent on companies like ours that specialize in this field to elevate the voices of the community and to put people in positions where they'll interact with the clients. And so that is an opportunity organically to start to hear from the community. I'll just say that I think it's shameful in our industry how few companies are actively trying to hire blind talent. The impediment's not significant. I don't want to speak for Eric, but I know that he's been open about sharing information with me and with other companies. I've been the same in terms of the talent that's out there, the approach, how we work in the recording booth, how we work with blind QC talents. And it's not like there's this secret sauce that we're all keeping hidden. We're both out there talking about it because we want other people to do it.
I think the secret sauce is the understanding that the impediment is not significant. It's the willingness to go beyond the current process and consider accommodations. That goes beyond anything blind talent can bring to the table. It's almost understandable when you consider how from its start, the production of AD has closely aligned with a charity model, like rehab or social services, where the so-called experts who study blindness determine what blind people need with little to no involvement from the community.
I will say that I think more blind involvement raises the quality of the audio description simply because it's getting that voice into the creation. It's making sure that perspective is represented in the creation. And if you don't think that's important, then you don't think quality is important.
100%. What I've said many times is that I don't think there should be anything proprietary about accessible workflows. If you figure something out, share it. Actually, Thomas, to your credit, if we're going to go even one step further back, through talking to you and onboarding you and working through our first project together and developing the workflows to work with blind voiceover talent, I learned a lot. And then I worked with other folks and they wanted to do it different ways. Over the course of the first year and a half, we had 4 to 5 different workflows. Reese called me up and he said, tell me what's up. And so we did. We got on a call and we talked. And I've made that same offer to, I don't know, a half a dozen other people, and only one other person has ever taken me up on it.
While not many companies reached out to Eric, there were some who were still interested in working with blind talent. Personally, I don't want my accommodation to remotely approach being an overburdening task for someone. Then again, overburdening is in the eye of the beholder. Remember, during the pandemic, the workflow changed for everyone. AD narrators were scrambling to set up home studios. Scripts and voice files were being delivered via the internet, whether that was through some secure proprietary system or via cloud services like Dropbox. The workflow was similar. Here's the thing. Once a company realizes its process is inaccessible to assistive technology and refuses to adjust or accommodate for that, that company is making a decision to exclude blind professionals. Period.
3 weeks ago, Thomas, I had a phone call or an email from another company seeking to work with a blind talent, but telling me they're not set up for it. They're not planning on getting set up for it. So would I mind doing all of the work to record the talent, send them the raw stems? They would then take credit for the project and put it out there like, look, we're working with blind people, but they didn't want to do any of the legwork to actually set themselves up to do the work. They wanted me to do all the work so they could take all the credit. This happened like within the last month. And this is a big company. I'm not going to name names, but I could. The conversation was embarrassing, but they felt no shame having it with me. So this is where we're at. I don't know if it's coming across that it's frustrating and I'm annoyed by it.
A little bit. I appreciate that frustration. This conversation is specifically about audio description. But as we approach National Disability Employment Awareness Month in October, we need to consider that whatever's at the core of keeping blind people out of AD is applicable to every other industry. What can be done to change this?
I engaged on social media, but it wasn't really until you and I connected, Thomas, where like it started becoming this really accelerated workflow to try to get people involved in the process. But in fairness, that's because Liz Gutman and I had that conversation. We think this is important. We need to start doing this. And then as soon as we started doing it, I think Reese was kind of around the same time frame. He was like, yeah, us too. And then I think we both thought after we did it, everybody would be like, yeah, let's all do it. And not the case, which is incredible.
To that point, I think part of the reason we would have had that expectation is I think it coincided with an increase in the quality of work that both our companies were producing. I don't know if that's coincidental or directly related, but I think that's true. And also, to be perfectly blunt, it's more interesting and more fun to do it this way. And why wouldn't you try to make the work you do more interesting and more fun and more meaningful? It doesn't jive with me because it's a little bit of additional thought that's involved, but your thoughts are free. Just spend a bit of that thought.
Lack of folks of color as writers and narrators. How does this get resolved?
I think anyone with a conscience and a sense of things can step back from AD and recognize that we have a representation issue as an industry. I think that the overwhelming majority of, speaking only about English audio description, but the English audio description that's being produced is being written by white people. I know that every AD writer strives for some level of objectivity, but the reality is that everybody sees things through a subjective lens. We are getting a homogeneity of description just demographically. In terms of what can you do about it, that's a little bit more complicated. It requires a little bit of investment and willingness to spend some time digging, willingness to find allies, willingness to push harder and to call out that it's a problem and then do something about it instead of just calling out that it's a problem and walking away from it.
When it comes to this issue of representation, if we really want to fix it, it can't be a patchwork approach. It needs to be a part of the foundation. And with all due respect to those who laid the AD foundation, cultural competence was never a part of that core structure.
I've been asked why it's important. What is the value of having culturally appropriate casting in a show? One aspect of it is it not being discordant for the audience, right? That's important. But the other thing is that the actual work done is going to be done better by somebody for whom the content is meaningful. And the experience of working on that project for everyone involved is going to be better if the content is meaningful to the people who are working on it. You actually elevate the product. Not only are you not doing something wrong, you're doing something better.
As far as the writers, Reese and I are going to have some cross-pollination on this one. There's a film festival out of Philadelphia called the Black Star Film Festival that we've worked with at IDC for a couple of years now, doing some tracks for them. And this year, Liz did a level 1 training with them. And then I got wind that the next step was going to be Reese taking them in the fall and doing a level 2.
We're launching an initiative to train some writers from underrepresented communities in the AD scripting community. That's happening in September. And it's an internal initiative. We're doing it on our own dime. But these AD writers will come out with strong training and be available for anybody to hire. There's no they'll become DVW employees. So there's opportunities for Eric to benefit from that. Any of the other AD providers to benefit from that. It was something where I tried to figure out this problem of how do I leverage this for my own company's benefit for years? And then I realized, you know what? The rationale is I don't. I just need to do it for the service's benefit. So we're trying to increase, or at least we are, DVW are, and I know IDC are very much aligned with us from this perspective, trying to increase the number of different voices that are allowed to participate in this conversation about AD.
Meanwhile, IDC continued to work with the Black Star cohort of writers. They even received some level 2 training from IDC head writer, Liz Gutman.
And they got to work hand in hand with Stephen Christopher, one of my writers and one of the best QC guys in the business. Did really in-depth feedback on all the scripts and varying results. Some really took to it well. Others obviously need some more work, like anything. But it was really encouraging. I think it was 8 to 10 people we got to work with, and I think a vast majority are going to be going on now to DVW and continuing on with some more training. I actually onboarded one of them this morning officially to write something for Netflix for me, which is super exciting. Coincidentally, a documentary based around the Black experience in America and the history of racism. So timing-wise, it's exactly the kind of project that we've been clamoring to have folks from the community available to write, because it's important for the perspective and the point of view. It's been something that I know that I've been personally frustrated about, because we've tried over the years. We have tried outreach. We've onboarded folks. This has been an ongoing pursuit for the last couple of years. And I think we finally found a pipeline through Black Star to do this.
I, for one, am excited about growing the AD space to include more representation. But let's be clear, that's not a replacement for cultural competence.
Just because you're white doesn't mean you can't write something that's sensitive and proper, that focuses around Black issues. You just have to be curious enough to want to do a good job. There was a movie a few years ago called The Harder They Fall on Netflix that Liz wrote, and she spent a lot of time researching the clothes and the hairstyles and reaching out to people and saying, how would you like that to be described? Really trying to do a good job, to the point where it actually got written up on a blog for being so well done in terms of representing skin tones and hairstyles, and called out for members of the Black community for being so culturally proper or sensitive or trying to do a good job in those regards. Now, at the time, did we wish we had a writer of color to write that script? We absolutely did. But that doesn't mean that we can take the excuse of like, oh, we're just white folks. No, you have to still try to get in there and honor the material and be proper and respectful of it.
It's worth taking a look at how that curiosity works to strengthen the final product.
I always credit when I hired Liz to write for me. I had a great base of writers, but that's really when we took the next step to becoming what I feel like we've become, one of the leaders in the field. A lot of what made Liz great and what makes her great now is her curiosity. She's constantly going to workshops. She's constantly talking to members from the community. She's constantly reading research papers and things that I just glaze over. She's never resting. She's always digging deeper and figuring more stuff out. How do we make it better? How do we get to the next level? It's never good enough for us. We want to be better. We don't always get there, but we try. If that's not your goal every day, getting up and going to work, if you're not taking pride in your job every day, like, I'm going to do better today than I did yesterday, then like you should find something else to do that fulfills you in some way, because clearly this is not it.
I think there's a dearth of people in our field that are driven by curiosity. I think we need more people who are looking broadly at like what can be done, or is the industry ready for this, or like what little step can I take today to get the industry ready for that tomorrow. And so whereas I think, and justifiably so to some degree, the vast majority of people who work in our field are very production focused. We are, because the production deadlines are intense, the expectations of our clients are quite substantial, and there's contractual obligations that we have to hit. But at the same time, sometimes, especially in a field like ours, which is still really in a nascent stage, like the ability to step back and go, I wonder about this. I'm curious about this. I want to find out more about it. We need more people driven by the interest in doing that.
That's writing AD. What about cultural awareness when it comes to narration?
There's just no excuse. The reality is that there's a vast array of voice talent that's out there. It's not all equivalent, right? There's some really kick-ass narrators and there's some less skilled ones. But there is no excuse not to find a narrator that's a appropriate cultural match for the content that you're describing. You can get really, really down in the weeds about it if you want to. We've gone to great depths to try to find somebody who's very specifically aligned with that skill set. And we've had some successes and some where we came up a little bit short, but that's because we tried. We pushed it out there as far as we could. Could I find a Kurdish narrator in the UK who's deaf to do the narration for this track? Well, no, but I did find a Kurdish narrator in the UK. That was a win in that respect. We found somebody who's culturally appropriate for the content that we were describing. Thoughtful casting costs you nothing. 5 seconds of your time to go, what's this show about? And not every show requires thoughtful casting. There are very generic shows that can just be relatively generically assigned, but there are shows that demand it. And if you as an AD provider don't take that responsibility seriously, why not? What is your impediment?
There's no excuse. I mean, come on. It's literally embarrassing if you can't cast correctly. I have well over a dozen narrators of color on my roster, close to 20 at this point, between Latin and Black backgrounds in Caribbean, Asian, East Asian. I have a wide collection of narrators. Again, everybody listening, they're available. You just have to email me. Reese has emailed me before, and hey, is this person available? And then I send them the email address, and he reaches out, and they go from there. These are freelancers. They are available. So if you're stuck and you need somebody, call me. It's now August of 2023, and there are no good excuses. There was no good excuses 5 years ago for this, and now it's pathetic. If your basis of diversity in your voiceover roster is still man, woman, the end, you're a clown. If you're justifying that to anyone, that's good enough, you're a clown, and you deserve to be called out for it. To Reese's point, I would be embarrassed to do some of these things that some of these companies are doing. It's shameful, and I hope more people shame them publicly, because I don't know what it's going to take just to do the minimal right thing. I don't get it.
By the way, this being an audio format, there was some vigorous nodding throughout.
So far, the quote of the day is, you are a clown.
We needn't stop at culturally appropriate casting of people of color. People of color can narrate the generic stuff too, right?
Oh, 1,000%.
You won't find those great narrators if you don't work with them.
That's a great point, Reese, and thank you. 'Cause that's exactly right. If you're a narrator of color working with me, you will work like the stuff that is meant to be voiced by people of color. That's the stuff exclusive to that part of the roster. People that look like me are not going to narrate things from the Black community. But yes, you can cross pollinate to any other just generic content.
Eric shares some additional advice for voiceover artists who traditionally choose not to disclose their various identities in hopes of having their voice judged on its quality alone.
Don't be afraid to put a picture on your website or put a little thing in your bio about your background, whether it be your nationality, LGBTQ. We're looking for that. Make it easier to find you. I think more companies are now scrambling pathetically to try to catch up a little bit. Now, standing out is actually, I think, a good thing in some cases.
We reached our final two categories: the influx of companies less concerned with quality, or as Eric so eloquently describes them.
You're a clown.
And then there's the dreaded TTS. Since the clowns and TTS are so closely aligned, we'll discuss them as one. The clowns are companies that first saw the need for audio description production as an opportunity. While there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, based on their actions and quality of production, it's apparent that's their greatest concern. So they look for cost cutting, like hiring anyone to write the scripts, and skip parts of the process like quality control. All of this to undercut competitors and offer below market rates for AD production.
It's a free market, right? The issue you run into is that companies that come in and throw a wide net out there and they say, hey, give me bids. And then you have other companies out there, streaming services and stuff that's coming online recently, that don't really put any effort or any research into trying to identify the good providers. They don't try to narrow it down to 5 or 6 providers that do good work and then set a rate. In a perfect world, that's what would happen. Every company would have a set group of providers they work with. They would set the rate internally across the board so nobody can undercut anybody or has any real incentive to undercut anybody. And that would be it. But we're in a free market and we live in North America.
And now it's time to play everybody's favorite game show, Say the Word.
Can you say capitalism? The truth is, everywhere you look, there's someone trying to make a fast dollar by cutting costs and sacrificing quality. Remember economics? Caveat emptor, or let the buyer beware. Consumers of all types should be educated enough to know the value of what they're buying. In this case, we're talking about large companies, networks, and streaming services that frankly have no experience with audio description. So how can they even begin to define quality AD? Yet still, they're procuring millions of dollars in AD for old and new content.
They're being misguided and they're being misled. And part of that is because they're talking to the clowns. They're talking to people who are trying to sell them on something. They're not necessarily talking to the audience. I always encourage them to are you sure? Have you spoken to anybody about this? Has anybody told you, by the way, the audience doesn't like this? But the other part of this is an AD provider is if you're confronted with that conversation, what do? Do you just go, yes, sir, we can do it? Or do you go, take that opportunity to talk to them about what they're asking for? To take that opportunity to go, are you sure that the experience you want your audience to have of your content, that is your precious item, is a subpar experience? Because it doesn't need to be.
Wow. So you're telling me that companies come to you and they say, we want TTS?
1,000%.
Yeah.
So it's not just that these platforms are being sold TTS. We're in a place now where they're actually shopping for it.
There's this thing with some companies that are starting to divide what they think is important content and what they don't think is such important content. And a lot of kids programming is being thrown into that not as important pile where synthetic is being used. And that to me is a complete bummer, because if anybody needs a real voice to engage with, and if anybody's going to get turned off by a computer voice, it's a kid. And especially kids on the spectrum, kids with ADHD, they're immediately going to just walk away from that content.
Too often, I hear members of the community who seem to feel that these distinctions are warranted. Just because you may not have an interest in specific content, that doesn't mean it's less important. And quite honestly, if you're not of the intended audience and don't require AD to consume visual content, Perhaps you should speak less on it and pass the mic so the community can speak for itself.
There are people out there that are pretty big in the industry in terms of visibility saying TTS is okay for certain things, for backfill or movies that are more than 20 years old. We should just be happy that things are getting described. I don't think anybody should be happy getting scraps and crumbs to make up for the fact that they weren't fed 30 years ago originally.
I don't know about you, but I'm hungry. And I know I deserve a full, hearty, delicious meal.
There are clients coming to us, clients that have produced, I'm talking some of the greatest content in the history of television in North America. And they're talking to me about synthetic. And I'm like, I would feel bad putting a synthetic track on this type of like I feel bad. You should feel worse because it's your content. You should have more pride in getting this described properly. The cost difference for companies like us to do synthetic versus real voicing is minimal. For Reese and I and companies that really care, the cost difference between TTS and real voice, it's not worth it. It's not a huge number where the cost saving is so extreme that a client should even really want to entertain it at this point, in my opinion.
We spent so much time in this conversation talking about diversity of casting and thoughtful casting. And then you give me a computer program that has 3 usable voices. Well, what am I supposed to do with that? How thoughtful can I get about the casting of A, B, or C voice? I can't.
Now they're starting to do this TTS stuff where they have black voices, quote unquote. You know what I mean? And it's just this like over the top, almost caricature voice. This idea that like black people sound the same or all white people sound the same. There's dialects and there's accents and there's nuance and it's like this generic voice. It's quasi-racist in a lot of ways where it's just like, it's silly.
And it goes beyond just the sound of the voice, right? Great narration track is often done by somebody who's connecting to the material. Well, you know who doesn't connect to material? Computers. TTS doesn't connect to the material. There's no lived experience of being LGBTQ for a TTS voice. You get a narrator who's skilled, a human narrator skilled, who's doing content of that type, and the connection that they come through, it's not performative particularly, but it's subtle, but it's there and it's present. If you're an adept listener of audio description, you can hear that that person gives a crap about what they're doing. We stand to lose all of that. Does TTS serve a function in audio description? 100%. How-to videos on YouTube, go for it. That's an entirely reasonable application for TTS. But if you're taking premium content, what is it you're trying to achieve by doing that?
The answer to all your questions in life is money. That's the old cliche. It's a pathetic thing to have to say, but that's really the answer. It only comes down to money. For some reason, no one's been able to figure out how to make money on AD at this point, which I don't understand. There's still a big void and lack of audio description in commercials. How we never as a business came around to like Procter & Gamble sponsoring this AD track and figuring out how to weave product placement into the AD track, kind of like they've done in movies over the years. There should have been a more thoughtful approach to monetizing this art form years ago, and that would have solved a lot of these problems. But the horse is out of the barn and tomato left, and it's four farms over at this point.
I like the idea here, Eric, of like an AD narrator drinking a Grimace shake while narrating a track and mentioning that that's what they're doing. A sponsored AD track. I like this.
It sounds a little silly and out there, but McDonald's is going to want a high quality product to go with their product.
We see that in live audio description. A lot of the times that will have a corporate sponsorship, whether it's the Olympics or an awards show. There's no reason that couldn't trickle down.
Sounds like a natural fit, especially for network broadcasters who already have relationships with advertisers. But I'm sure the streaming services like Netflix, Max, and others can make this happen. Then just leave it to the accountants to identify other financial benefits for the company. From the consumer position, we're already used to sponsored ads and underwritten programming. With all of the issues we identified and discussed today, it's extremely important that we as consumers are fully aware of our power, and we shouldn't be scared to flex or put it to use.
Thomas, the first time I was on your podcast, I talked about this. Streaming companies and businesses in general, yes, they are forced to respond to negative things, but they would much rather not deal with negative things. And the best way to not deal with it is to just give the consumer a product that they just enjoy and that they'll just be quiet about, right?
I want to keep encouraging people, like hold all of us accountable. Eric and I are out here talking a talk. Hold us accountable for walking that walk. If we do something that you think is subpar or could be done better,
We make mistakes, but we want to hear about them. That's why we put our names on our tracks. That's why we're out there on social media. That's why we're reachable. It's telling the circus providers, the clown shows, they don't put their names on tracks. Continue to call out the bad stuff, especially stuff that's not being culturally appropriate, because that's disgraceful and that needs to go. I think equally important, highlight the good too, because it will matter. It will filter more of that work to the companies that are taking pride in doing it well. The end goal is to get the product to be as good as possible. And so sometimes you just kind of have to shine a light and push the client towards that direction.
it's sort of historically been the mindset of gratitude. Thank you so much for giving us audio description. And I get that because it wasn't there. Now it's more prevalent, but it's not enough. The focus on gratitude should shift into what makes good AD. There's different schools of thought. We're not all going to agree on everything, and that's fine. But I think we all should have some accountability to producing that quality AD. From a consumer advocacy standpoint, I'm glad people are grateful for the access that they have, but access isn't enough. It has to be better access. It's not much harder to perform this work well than it is to perform it badly. It's not that much more of a time investment. It's not that much more of a money investment, and the audience deserves better.
Has there ever been any conversation about the post-production companies, the AD production companies coming together?
Bringing everybody to a summit and saying, like, here are the problems, let's solve this?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, that's an idea.
it's a great idea. I've proposed it numerous times to numerous entities. I won't name them, that I thought had more ability to sway, leverage that. It's problematic, but I think there are ways in which it could happen. I think we're nearing a point where more of these organizations, the content owners, the bigger studios, have people who actually are focused on caring about the quality of their accessibility. Individuals within their company who are tasked with it, not just project managers on a given title, but like actually overarching people who are looking at this within their organization. The more that exists, the more likely we are to be able to have productive collective conversations. There's a collegiality amongst this group, those who actually care about it and those who are invested in it, to help elevate the product that we're trying to do and to push each other. I pay very close attention to what Eric is doing. I support it. But I also want to know, if he zigs, I want to make sure that we're also zigging at the same time, because philosophically there's alignment. If he uncovers some awesome new thing, I want to make sure we're doing it too. And I think vice versa. That's where I'm also hoping others can join this idea and get behind us and start pushing Eric and I to think in different ways. I'm very open to that sort of level of competition.
Big thanks goes out to Eric Wickstrom and Reese Lloyd, and of course, Michael McNeely from Part 1. Gentlemen, I truly appreciate your time and honesty. I'm not sure if you know this, but you are each official Read My Mind Radio family. If you want to reach out to Eric and/or Reese, you can do that first via the formerly cool app known as Twitter, now annoyingly known as X.
At IDC_Eric, ERIC.
At Razloyd, RAZLLOYD, or for those of you in the States, RAZLLOYD. At Described Video.
Find them both on LinkedIn.
Eric Wickstrom.
Reese Lloyd, RHYSLLOYD.
Or reach out via their respective companies.
IDCdigital.com is our corporate website. You can always send a message there. It will filter to me.
Email us at info@descriptivevideoworks.com, and we do answer those emails.
After reviewing all of these issues and their proposed solutions, it still feels like no one will save us. But if I modify that slightly, it can feel a bit more optimistic and potentially something we can solve. No one will save us. So we all need to work together. We, as in AD consumers and their loved ones. Anyone involved in the AD process, writers, audio engineers, narrators, etc. Those in solidarity, no matter the access need. Filmmakers, storytellers, producers who want their creative work consumed and appreciated. Broadcasters and streaming platforms. We can each do something. Broadcasters and streaming platforms. Hire a dedicated person and or team of individuals responsible for content accessibility, preferably from the user communities. Caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. Can you imagine going to a car dealership and realizing there's only a 5% difference between the used beat-up car with 100,000 miles, torn seats, and a crappy mismatched paint job versus a brand new shiny Mercedes-Benz? Unless you have a thing for hoopties, I'm pretty sure you're leaving that dealership with a Benzo. So why in the world would you purchase AD for your content that's the equivalent of a hoopty, a lemon? Junk. How about getting together with other content platforms to assure that you all play nice and share the existing AD tracks? There's no reason titles with AD shouldn't have AD everywhere. Filmmakers, storytellers, producers who want their creative work consumed and appreciated. Learn about AD. Consume accessible content. Consider its benefits to your storytelling process. Make your content accessible. Reach out to the community and increase your views. Those in solidarity, no matter the access need. Share. Experience AD for yourself. Tell other people about it. If you have a platform, invite others to talk about it. Anyone involved in the AD process, writers, audio engineers, narrators, etc. Meet and talk to a diverse group of consumers who are blind or have low vision. Reach out to a local organization of the blind. Ask for input and feedback on AD. You never know, you might make a new friend. Hopefully you are or have consumed AD. Take pride in your work, and like any career, keep getting better. And don't be scared to innovate. Take the pledge. Say it with your chest. Sign on to show your commitment to culturally competent AD. Link on readmymind.com. If your organization isn't currently or in the process of making space for blind professionals in the production process, I guess I have to just ask, how do all of you in those big red shoes fit in that little car? AD consumers and their loved ones. First, I got a message from the gratitude gods. They said enough is enough. We deserve true access. For those who want to accept subpar anything, that's your choice. But be quiet. Say less. You're not helping anyone. Some of us know our value, and we're not lowering our standards. Why in the world would you advocate for that? Advocacy comes in so many forms, and I know lots of folks who struggle because they feel there's only one way. For many, that's through some formal organization. Yet, some of these organizations aren't equally welcoming. Some seem as though they exist to maintain their existence. Some of you are great letter writers. Why not put that skill to use and seek support for the Communications, Video, and Technology Accessibility Act? Advocacy is taking place when we provide real feedback. As Eric and Reese said, that's holding everyone accountable and sharing both the good and bad. Do it publicly. We have the tools. Advocacy is keeping people informed. I think of Stanley Yarnell, the sheriff of the Blind Posse. If you haven't heard of them, it's a crew of AD enthusiasts who appreciate audio description in museums and galleries. The sheriff sends out email blasts, at least monthly, informing the posse of events online and in the Bay Area. By the way, feel free to let me know what you're doing in your area. After hearing from Michael McNeely in part 1, I'm convinced. The state of captions are not what we're trying to attain. Yes, there's a greater level of awareness, but the takeaway lesson to me, quality has to be the goal. Hopefully, you can recognize that quality is something I try to pour into every episode of this podcast, including this season of Flipping the Script on audio description. This is the last episode of the 2023 season, and I already have some things that I want to bring you next year. Due to some existing commitments, I'm not producing another season this year, but I truly recommend you stay tuned because sometimes I just get inspired. And I'm hoping we'll have more blind-centered audio description chats to share in the feed soon. So make sure you rock with Read My Mind Radio by following or subscribing wherever you get podcasts. We have transcripts and more at readmymind.com. Now here's the thing. This is something that you really should know by now. That's R to the E, I.
D, and that's me in a place to be.
Like my last name. Peace.